The Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for July 17th will now come to order. Please stand with us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can we have roll call, please?
Chairman Williams,
Here.
Vice Chairman Severs, Secretary Chambers, Member Spidell,
Here.
Member Baker, Member Richardson,
Here.
Member Hare,
Here.
Member Noel Copeland.
Here.
All right, and we have quorum. Next is approval of minutes for July 5th, 2019. I actually did have a correction on this. Normally, I never pay attention to the minutes that much because, you know, if we really ever wanted to go back, we can watch the videos, which is a little, but because it is on the record, I would like to have these corrected. On page 9 of 101, at the very end of that, Mr. Severs made a motion and he went through the points. He had several points and I actually agreed with all of his points for the motion, but my issue with that CPA 1-2018 was that it left the property incompatible between the flume and the zoning, and that was my issue. It wasn't because I didn't agree with Mr. Severs. So with that, is there a motion to approve and any corrections?
On page,
And let me add this too, and just so you can check, because I actually went through and watched the video to make sure, because I was shocked that at 3 hours and 17 minutes is where that was ending, so.
on page 1 of the minutes, it doesn't list Peggy Bisaka in attendance, and it shows Brad in attendance. And that was the day of her birthday, and we weren't invited to the party. So with that correction, I make a motion that we approve in your correction.
Okay,
I'll second it.
all right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? I'll do it this way. All persons who anticipate speaking on any public hearing item must first fill out the oath card to be on that agenda item and sign the oath card contained thereon. These cards are located on the table near the entrance to the council chamber or may be obtained from the recording secretary. This meeting will be conducted in accordance to procedures adopted in Resolution 24-1997. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first, those opposed will be heard second, and those who wish to make a public comment on an item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. A representative from either side for or against may cross-examine the witness. Anyone who speaks is considered a witness. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents you desire the commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and will be retained by the city. Please submit such exhibits to the recording secretary. Staff, has all items been properly advertised?
Yes, everything's been advertised.
And has anybody on the commission had the opportunity to speak or visit any of the items coming before us?
No.
No.
Okay. All right, with that, if we would go to the first line of new business, correct?
So the first item for you tonight is agenda item number 9A, and that's development agreement number 2-2019. This is the fourth amendment to the development agreement of Titus Landing. This will be a public hearing tonight. Development agreement will also require a final public hearing before City Council on Tuesday, July 23rd. The applicant Excel Project Management, on behalf of the owner Titusville Harrison 1 LLC, has submitted an application to approve the fourth amendment to the development agreement for Titus Landing, which was originally approved under application number 3-2013. I apologize. This actually starts on page 11 of your packet. Okay. And this is for property located at 2500 South Washington Avenue. The property subject of this request is approximately 30+ acres in size and currently has an approved development agreement and final master plan. The amendment proposed in this request extends the development agreement for an additional 5 years until February 18th, 2024. Section 24 term of the development agreement states that the term shall be 5 years with the right of the developer to request 2 extensions up to a total of no more than 10 years from the date of approval. This request is the first request for extension for the remaining 5 years of the 10-year term. The Titus Landing project has 2 phases. Phase 1 and a portion of Phase 2 are complete. Approving the request extension of the agreement will allow the owner to complete the project as contemplated and approved under the original development agreement. On page 13 begins the city's staff report. The property is zoned currently urban village with a future land use designation of urban mixed use. The proposed amendment of the development agreement does not affect either the future land use or the zoning designations. Staff recommends approval of this request. And starting on page 14 of your packet, you will see the draft agreement, which will amend the original agreement, excuse me. And then the application begins, that was submitted by the applicant on page 17. I believe the applicant is here to answer any questions. That's all I have.
That's it. All right, so we'll open this public.
Doug Kaiser with Excel Project Management. The only thing I'm here for is to answer any questions that you might have. I think it's pretty straightforward. We're just extending the agreement we already have in place.
Let me ask a question real quick. Mr. Richardson, I apologize, I didn't see you on here. Did you have a question for staff, or was you were chiming in for your
No,
button?
that was
For the,
minutes.
okay, sorry. Are there questions of Mr. Kaiser? Or Noah Copeland?
So just so I understand, the original current agreement would mean that all of the shops would have to be developed sooner than this, and this gives you an extension to continue to develop the stores within Titus Landing for another 5 years? Is that the basic crux of this?
I think it just extends the agreement that we made for developing the property for another 5 years. We haven't built out every building
I
on
know.
the site yet.
Right, and I'm asking, is the purpose of this to give you another 5 years on the current agreement to build out the remaining stores?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Under the, original terms that we agreed to,
Okay. All right,
as
are
amended.
there any other questions? All right, thank you. Is there any other cards on this item?
No, sir.
All right, so we'll close this to the public, bring it back before the board for a vote. What is the commission's desire? Mr. Richardson,
I move we recommend approval to City Council for Development Agreement number 2-2019.
is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Can we take a vote on this?
Member Spidel?
Yes.
Member Hare?
Yes.
Member Richardson?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes. All right, motion passes. Thank you. Next item, please.
The next item is agenda item number 9B, and that begins on page 22 of your packet. This is for a conditional use permit, case number 4-2019. This is called the Orange Street parking lot. This will be a public hearing before you tonight, and the City Council will hear a public hearing at their next meeting. The applicant is requesting a conditional use permit to allow parking lot as a principal use. There are 2 properties subject of this request. The 2 properties totaling less than ½ an acre are located at the corner of Grannis Avenue and Orange Street and Robbins Avenue and Orange Street within the urban mixed-use zoning district. If the request is approved, the sole use of the property will be an off-street parking lot, which is permitted with conditions per Section 28-149 of the code. Staff is recommending several conditions of approval. These include If the applicant submits a site plan and requires variances to the code or waivers to any technical manuals, that will be dealt with at that time. So in other words, the concept plan that was submitted to you tonight is concept and only. It is not the actual how the parking lot will be designed. So the reason is for that is if there are any issues, they would have to redesign that in order to address meeting the code unless they receive waivers or variances. The second condition is that there will be an opaque fence at 6 feet in height constructed along all interior property boundaries to screen the proposed use from the property adjacent to the subject property. What that means is there are some residential properties adjacent to this property. We'd like to see that parking lot screened. In other words, provide some screening for those residential lots. All lighting shall be pedestrian scale and fixtures shall be mounted no higher than 6 feet. They did provide to us a rendering of, or an illustration of a type of fixture, be about probably 4 feet high. We didn't have any issue with that. We want to leave the condition as flexible as possible, so during site plan, they could provide specifics of what that lighting would be. But it would be more pedestrian scale. That way, we won't create a parking lot with a lot of light that would be bleeding onto adjacent properties. The fourth condition is that site lighting shall be designed and oriented so that the amount of light at the southern property boundary is 0. Again, that's to prevent bleeding of light onto adjacent properties. So on page 24 of your packet begins the staff report. The purpose of the proposal, and I'm going to begin on page 25 of your packet, actually. Under staff analysis. The purpose of the proposed lot is to support the existing commercial plaza located at 1225 through 1231 Garden Street. There is a commercial piece of property that is on the south side of Garden Street that would like to purchase this property south of them that's in a different zoning district and build a parking lot for their purposes. So it's an off-site parking lot, basically. The 2 properties subject to this request are currently vacant and covered in vegetation. Based on the concept plan, the entirety of the 2 properties would be utilized in the development of the proposed lot. We provided analysis here based on what the code requires as far for a conditional use permit. We addressed on page 26 of your packet the screening and buffering we thought, and the lighting that we thought that was the most important. There is a requirement for a 20-foot landscape buffer along right-of-way. So the concept plan doesn't really illustrate that because that 20 feet requirement really eats into the property. So that's probably going to have to be a variance that they're going to have to address during the site plan review. So they may have to redesign this parking lot unless they receive variances. On page 27 of your packet, this is a condition that's already in the code about the hours of operation. No vehicles are allowed to be moved between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. on the property. Council may impose more stringent hours of operations through the public hearing process, and they could also do that with your recommendation if you see fit. There are also development standard setbacks within the urban mixed-use zoning district on page 27 of your packet, under paragraph number 9, required yards and other open spaces. There is a front setback, a side corner setback, a rear setback that they're going to have to deal with in some way. And if they can't address those issues, they'll have to get variances. The size of parking spaces, the number of parking spaces can be addressed through waivers of the technical manuals that are in the code. On page 28 of your packet are the recommended conditions again that are in the staff report. Page 29 starts the application. On page 37 of your packet, you'll see the zoning map. You can see that this property, again, is in the urban mixed-use zoning district. To the west and to the east and to the south, this property, again, is also in the urban mixed-use zoning district. Those areas are slated primarily for residential. In the north of this property, on the north side of Orange Street, are properties that are zoned M1, which is a light industrial, and CC, that is a community commercial. The property at the southeast corner of Grannis Avenue and Garden Street is who is requesting this application. So this parking lot would serve that particular property. You could see on page 38, an aerial, that the property is vegetated and vacant. And again, we'll serve that existing development that's at the southeast corner of Garden and Grannis. On page 42 of your packet, I've included an excerpt of the code related to off-street parking lots. That's section 28-149 of the code. I've highlighted under the UMU, Urban Mixed Use Zoning District, the letter C, that requires a conditional use permit. That's why they're going through this process. You will see further down on that same page, highlighted urban mixed use zoning. There are several conditions in the code that they have to meet. They meet those, in addition to the additional recommended conditions that we're proposing. And I did include an illustration of what they propose as far as lighting on page 43, that we are not making it as a condition that they use that specific type of lighting. On the last page of the agenda item, page 44, you will see a concept plan, how they had proposed to design the parking lot. With that, I'll try and answer any questions you have. I believe the applicant is here, Ms. Rosenka is here to answer any questions as well.
Okay, we'll open this to the public. Are there questions of staff? Okay, I just wanted to comment, I liked the lighting pictures that you put in there. It gives us an idea of what you're talking about by low level, and so I appreciate that. Member Noel Copeland.
You said this was currently 2 properties. Would the 2 properties be joined as part of this? Would they be?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
the 2 current properties would be joined and they would become one property, one lot that's zoned as parking?
I believe so. Even if they're not, if they are approved site plan on both properties, that site plan is going to govern both of them. So I think it's in their best interest to probably tie it together under one deed, if that's what you're asking. Yeah.
And then is there, maybe this is a question for the owner, but would this allow overnight parking, or is this just for daytime parking?
If parking is parked on the property after 10 p.m., a parking lot, what the condition is saying is you can't move those spaces. You can't move those vehicles.
Right, I understand
So-
that, but would overnight parking be allowed?
We would not prohibit that. I don't think that's what the condition's prohibiting.
And is the end unit on that, the property that you're saying this would service, I think, is that end unit, isn't it vacant? Like, that's a huge end unit, and I thought it was vacant, so I'm trying to figure out why there's a huge need for this level of additional parking.
There is a business there.
There is, on that
Yes.
end unit?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I think that's all my questions for right now.
All right, so did you have a question?
I did. Do you know what kind of vehicles are going to be parked there? Are they service trucks?
That's a good question for the applicant. I believe they are vehicles that, they may be service vehicles, yes.
Okay, but they're going to be, you can't see, that residents will not be able to see them because of fencing?
Well, what we're suggesting is that there be a fence on the south side of the property to provide opaque screening from the parking lot and the residents on the south of this property, yes. We are not proposing fencing along the right-of-way
Okay.
to enclose the parking lot, no.
Okay. Do you know, but they're service vehicles? Are they tractor trailers or just service vehicles?
The applicant can answer that question, I
Okay,
think.
okay.
All right, so let's do this so we get some of the answers. We'll open it to the public. Mr. Zanka, if you'd like to come up.
Good evening, Chairman Williams, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Kim Rozenka. I am with the law firm of Cantwell and Goldman, PA, in Cocoa Village. I am here representing the owner of the property, Garden Street Office Retail Complex, LLC. The owner purchased the end unit, which is actually 4 units. And it's a 4-unit commercial center. It's approximately 18,000 square feet. At the time he purchased that unit in January of 2018, he also purchased the 2 vacant lots to the south. It all came in one deed. So they are all technically together, but I think they all have different tax units. So actually the 2 vacant ones have 1 tax code. So they're somewhat joined already. But they're small. There's not much you can do with those parcels anyway. So it's 1,900 square feet for those 4 units. It has very scant parking. If you look at page 38 of your package, you'll see that it only has spots in the front of the building along Garden and then along the side. There's only 18 parking spaces. And the problem is the medical office supply already uses all of those. So I personally don't know if that very end unit is rented, but there's no parking for anybody. That's why he's trying to do this, to get the additional parking. That was what he thought he could do when he bought the property, is use those vacant lots for parking. And it's for employee parking mostly. It could be some people that go to that facility, but it's not meant for service vehicles. There are no service vehicles that are needed there. And there may also be a fence along the roadway. We don't know yet. But it's not intended for overnight parking. It's just so there's enough parking for the facility that's already there, the 19,000 square feet. Right next to it, and I gave you this picture so you saw better of what I was talking about. There was nothing in the packet. I'm sure you're very familiar with this place. But the white units are the one that my client owns, and then the orange building to the east is another 4-unit complex. It was built in 1969. It doesn't have enough parking either by your current codes, and it's where the Donut For You location is. But the 4 units that my client owns was built in 1978, and it's just, I don't know if roadway was taken. I'm not exactly sure how it wound up with only 18 units. So he intended to put the parking lot on this vacant lot, but the zoning would not allow it. Actually, he came to me and said, can you change the zoning so we can put a parking lot? And I worked with Mr. Parrish and Ms. Bisaka. And you may recall back in, I think, February of this year, you actually reviewed this ordinance to change the Section 28.149 to allow parking lots in the urban mixed use. And then that was approved by City Council in February of this year. We had hoped it would be a permitted use because it was such a small lot and there are already conditions in the code, but it came back through this conditional use process. As to the conditional use, the Section 28.149D, as Mr. Parrish stated, which is in your packet, sets out the standards that must be met for a conditional use for an off-street parking lot. The owner agrees to comply and require the tenants to comply with all the conditions cited and recommended by your staff. They intend to seek variances to the setbacks and the landscaping during site plan for engineering. As you saw from that concept plan, it almost looks like half of it's setbacks and retention. So my client is hoping to get some of that waived. If they aren't waived, he can only put 22 spots there, 22 spaces. So we're hoping to get 32, so there is sufficient parking and allowable use for the 4 units of his other property. With that, I would request approval of CUP 4-2019 for an off-street parking lot, and hope that answered some of your questions.
Yes, all right. Are there questions of Ms. Rozenka? I had a question on the service vehicles question. Part of the staff's report was saying that there couldn't be 24-hour parking, there couldn't be service activity, and you had mentioned that that there wouldn't be service.
It's not intended for service vehicles. Right. It's intended just to serve that unit. Right now, I don't know what service vehicles there would be. I don't know if the medical office supply has some, I don't know. I don't know if they have delivery trucks or whatever it is, but it's not intended for overnight parking. It's only intended to service those 4 units.
The reason why I bring this up is because I don't know if it's regional mixed use. It's one of the larger it's almost, it's not industrial, but it's, I think Searstown is an example of that type of zoning, to where they can put vans, they can do storage. And so I just want to make sure that the intent of this code change isn't to where this can now be rented out, it can be.
That's why I asked about overnight parking.
Right.
Yeah,
And
it's,
so the language looks like it would prohibit it, and so I'm just saying if it wouldn't prohibit it, would this be something, because it is a CUP, that we could tie a condition to say no overnight parking?
well, what
or
happens if an employee's battery is dead? I
Well,
don't know.
no, I mean, I can
Yeah,
understand that. And honestly, to trip that, somebody has to make a complaint.
Right,
The city is not gonna go out and code enforcement is not gonna come out the same day because of something like that.
Right.
But I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying that, given that the backside of that property is residential, I would think that this would afford some of the residential units some protection from more of an industrial use of this.
there is nothing behind it, actually, it's vacant behind it as well, but I do,
Well,
and there'll be a
yes.
fence there, but you can add that as a condition. I don't know that my client has any objection to it. I know he's not planning on renting it out, I know he's not gonna charge for parking, I know those things, but
It
you could add
appears-
those as conditions as well, if that would make you more
It
comfortable.
appears the language, and so I would defer to staff, but it appears the language of the code suffices, but I want to make sure that it does. So, that's all I had.
Okay.
Were there any other questions of the applicant? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there other cards on this?
No, sir.
All right, so we'll close this to the public, bring it back before the board. Other questions of staff? So I will go back to my question, if you could answer what I was referring to about no parking overnight. I see that in what you're saying, but I want to ensure that the business of, like, I think I see Sago there, you know, if they had delivery trucks, they could take all their delivery trucks and park it there. So not like I want to regulate business, I don't. I just think that we need to afford some protections when you're encroaching into a residential neighborhood.
To answer your question, I mean, under the current zoning condition, D shall not allow parking of automobiles to exceed a period of 24 hours. So let's say they have service vehicles and they operate them during the day. They bring them back before 10 p.m. There's another condition here. Park them there overnight, and then they start their business again and remove those vehicles off-site at 7 a.m. because that's 10 p.m. between 7 a.m. You're not supposed to be having vehicles on and off the property, moving along on the property.
So
We
you're
don't see
saying
any
that-
problem with that.
You don't see a problem with filling up the parking lot with service deliveries?
No, sir. How they use the parking lot for their business is no different than how you'd use a parking lot in any other business in the city. So, for example, there are, I can name maybe a maid service business, and they have several vehicles they use for their employees to go out to different areas of the city to do maid services. And they bring those vehicles back to park overnight in their parking lot. You'll see, we don't see any issue with that. We think the conditions are satisfactory.
I mean, I'm looking at, it looks like 4 houses on the immediate east-west, and then, although it doesn't touch, you have the house that, is that a house at Grannis? But it's not immediately touching that because you have a small parcel right there. And so, one of the things that we've talked about, huh?
That overgrown thing in the corner is a house.
Okay, there is a house in there too?
That's a house. Well,
Okay.
I just looked on Google Maps. It looks like there's a house there.
It did at first, but then I couldn't tell because of the canopy. Point is that, so the one thing that we don't like to see from planning is to have industrial zoning immediately to residential. This would be construed, in my opinion, as industrial, given the capability. And so I'm just saying, I don't believe it would be appropriate to give them that ability for industrial usage, which it would be. Given it be a parking lot during the day, okay. But 24/7 they could rent it out and use it for Avis and then have their office up front. Those are the points I'm making. Although it isn't the situation for their applicant at this time, it's potential, yes. And that's my concern, is the potential later in protecting the area at this point. Member Noel Copeland.
So I was going to say largely what you said. I just think that it should be posted as no overnight parking.
So that would need a condition.
That there's a sign
Of-
there
of the
in the parking
CUP.
lot that says no overnight parking.
No, what I'm saying is that would need to be a
Yes.
condition on the CUP, of whoever makes the motion.
That's a condition of the zoning already.
It
So-
is, but you're telling me that,
No, you said the condition currently, I believe you said, is no 24-hour parking.
That's
But
right.
they could overnight it
They could.
between 10 to 7. And
Okay.
I'm saying, I think it should be no overnight.
Okay. All right, that's
Because
what you-
because of this issue. I mean, those businesses have vans that they use for deliveries, during the day. And we could, very easily have 6 to 10 vans parked back there every night. And I don't think that's the intent of what we're trying to approve.
and on the other hand, I was looking at off-site parking, and the first thing that came to my mind was, I think El Leoncito has off-site parking, the Irish Pub has off-site. It's not like it's unheard of to have overflow parking. And that's what I was kind of originally considering this as, and so it's just protecting that idea. All right, that was all I had, and we had already closed this to the public. So with that, are there any more questions of staff, or is there a motion to be made? Would you like to make a motion, given that?
I move that we, I can't find the number. I move that we approve CUP 4-209 Orange Street parking lot with the provision that no overnight parking is allowed in the lot.
Is there a second?
With the conditions, all 4 conditions, and we recommend approval to council.
Yes,
Okay.
with that 5th condition added.
I'll second the motion and add one comment that'll date me. Is, you know what the original building was for? Merritt Square Bank.
Yep,
It
that's
had so
right.
much activity. The drive-throughs were across Garden Street in what is now Bagel 13.
Oh, wow.
And I see that is more commercial than industrial.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, I was concerned about tractor trailers or something, but that's not, you can't even put a tractor trailer in depth on this lot.
All right, and that was the second?
Yeah.
All right, so can we take a vote on this?
Member Richardson?
Yes.
Member Spidel?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Member Hare?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes. All right, motion passes. All right, if we can go to the next item, please.
So the next item before you is agenda item number 9C. This is the Riverwalk Apartments Plan Development Rezoning number 1, case number 1-2019. This begins on page 45 of your packet. This is a public hearing tonight. There will also be a first reading before City Council at their next council meeting, and then a public hearing for potential for a final adoption of the ordinance in August 13th, I believe. The request tonight is to amend the master plan and conditions of a plan development that was originally approved through case ordinance number 7-2019, and this is to allow the relocation of a 3-story apartment building and clubhouse. I'll get to the concept plan and show you exactly what's changing, including I'll highlight some of the conditions. I do want to point out to you, though, that I did leave on the dais in front of you there, a handout. Since the publication of this application to you for your agenda, there have been some changes to the staff report, and I gave you a copy, a front and back copy of the last 2 pages of that staff report. On the top of it, the page, you will see it's titled Agenda Item Rezone Number 1-2019 Plan Development and Master Plan. If you haven't found that, please tell me. Okay. So you'll see on page, it says on page 14, the first front page of this copy that I gave you, it says community meeting. This was not in the original staff report. This is new language. There was a community meeting that the applicant conducted as required by the comprehensive plan. They received input from the public, including requests to change some of the conditions of the original plan development zoning for this property. The staff, which I'll explain later, finds that some of the requests for the conditions that were proposed by the applicant as a result of that community meeting are unenforceable, and the staff does not recommend them. On page 15 of the staff report, which is the other side of that same page I just handed to you, we have staff's recommendations. I made a few changes, tweaks to that, which are different from your original staff report that are in your agenda packet. The main change to the conditions of the master plan are really to the original condition that was approved back earlier this year to ordinance number 7-2019. And that is that originally the parking ratio was going to be waived to allow for ratios between 1.5 to 2.0 spaces per unit, which our current code requires 2.5 spaces per unit. Now in this new ordinance, the applicant is asking for an increased ratio of 1.5 to 2.3, which is still below our code standard of 2.5. So it's a minor change. They just want to increase it a little bit, but it's still below our minimum threshold in our code. And that's because of the changes which I'll describe in the master plan. So it's a slight increase in the number of parking spaces they're requesting. In the master plan itself, they are proposing to put a 3-story apartment building that is going to be on a piece of area of the development that is adjacent to US 1. I'll illustrate where that is in a moment. And there's also where the clubhouse was originally going to be proposed has been relocated now closer to US 1 as well. I'll also illustrate where that's located. So I apologize, those were the changes made to the staff report. So on ordinance number 7-2019, which was approved earlier this year to approve a master plan with a plan development zoning for several apartment buildings on US 1, I have a PowerPoint presentation on this that will summarize. As soon as that comes up, I'll go through that. On page 45 of your packet begins a summary of some of the conditions that were originally approved with that rezoning that happened earlier this year. One of the conditions that was approved was that there would be no direct access to River Edge Drive. Parking spaces may be a minimum size of 9x18 in lieu of this code requirement of 10x20. The parking ratio will be between 1.5 to 2.0 spaces per unit. That's being increased a little bit to 2.3. There is a proposed 45-foot wide buffer adjacent to the single-family lots on the east of this development. I'll show where that is. That condition was originally approved back early this year as well. We had asked for opaque fencing and a 6-foot high fence, and a additional size trees in the landscape buffers between this development and the adjacent industrially zoned properties. So we'd ask for 4.5-inch caliper, 4-inch DBH trees to be planted. Those are much larger trees than we typically ask for, so that will provide that additional screening there. We also had a condition there originally to require a sheltered bicycle parking. So on page 48 of your packet, you'll see the beginning of the staff report. I'll briefly go through that. So this property is located at 5335 South Washington Avenue. It's about 21 acres. The use is proposed to have 210 apartment units. And I miscounted there, but there are several 3-story buildings. I believe there are probably going to be 11 altogether. And again, the clubhouse and one of the apartment buildings that were originally approved earlier this year are going to be relocated now, closer to US 1. You'll see on the presentation here that the property is zoned currently, planned development, as originally approved by Ordinance number 7-2019 earlier this year. The future land use on that property is medium density residential, which allows 10 units per acre. Beginning on page 29 of your packet in the staff report, you'll see a description of the current zoning and land use and the surrounding zoning and land use, including the surrounding uses. There are single-family lots to the east of the property on River Edge Drive. North of this property has an industrially zoned property. West of it, there is also an industrially zoned property and also a commercially zoned property. Beginning on page 50 of your packet, I'm just going to briefly go through the history of the development approval changes that have happened here. In 1993, the property was zoned to regional commercial. In 2005, the property was rezoned to multifamily medium density, R2, with a comprehensive plan land use amendment that was approved at that time. In 2010, conditions were amended to accommodate an assisted living facility. In 2018, conditions were amended again to accommodate an apartment complex of 191 units. 2019, earlier this year, Ordinance number 7-2019 was adopted to rezone the property from the R2 multifamily zoning district to the current planned development zoning district with the master plan that currently governs this property. And that includes 9 buildings with 210 residential units. The current application before you today is to change that master plan and the condition I've already described. We believe it is consistent with the zoning criteria, which begin on page 51 of your packet, and the land use policies that we've identified in the comprehensive plan. The applicant did indicate to us on page 56 of your packet that there is a wetland that is less than 5 acres, and the Addison Canal is located in the east corner of the property. That this amendment does not impact the Addison Canal area. A small portion of the existing wetland located to the rear of Building 2 of the concept plan will be impacted as a result of the development. I'll allow the applicant to explain that. The remainder of the wetlands will be preserved as part of the master plan, and the Addison Canal is in the conservation land use. We believe it meets the conditions of the plan development criteria beginning on page 58 of your packet. On the screen, you'll see the master plan as proposed today, or as proposed or submitted in your packet. We believe that we did a preliminary concurrency review. We believe there will not be any issues as far as concurrency facilities. That includes water, sewer, potable water, stormwater and solid waste. On page 61 of your packet, we have the recommendation, so I'll briefly go through that. That we recommend that the plan development rezoning ordinance and Riverwalk Apartments master plan with the conditions specified in the ordinance be approved. Approval of the rezoning will allow the property owner to utilize the maximum density allowed under the comprehensive plan, which allows 10 units per acre. 35% of the property will be dedicated to open space as required in the plan development zoning requirements. The perimeter landscape buffers will exceed the minimum standards of the land development regulations. It is already illustrated 2 areas. One is larger planting of trees where there is adjacent industrially zoned property, and also a large or wide residential buffer on the east side of the property. This was being carried over. This is not being changed. You'll see on the illustration on the presentation that there is a 3-story building that'll be near the entrance on US 1, and the clubhouse will be closer to US 1 as well. This was not illustrated in the original master plan earlier this year. Those areas were blank. On page 62 begins the ordinance, so that ordinance will govern this property and any changes to it. On page 65 of your packet, you'll see the highlighted area. That is the one minor condition, change to the condition about the parking ratio. On page 68 of your packet, you'll see the master plan that's submitted for through your packet. And again, you'll see that three-story building located near the entrance, and also the clubhouse located near the entrance. Everything in yellow that you see there represents the required 35% open space per the plan development zoning criteria. One issue that came up during the staff review of this application was that the code requires a second access for developments that have more than, or 201 or more residential units. And so the applicant provided to us a letter justifying a request for a waiver to this, which can be done through this PD process, so that it becomes part of this, approval of this master plan creates that waiver. Page 69, you'll see that written request and explaining that request for not a second entrance. And in fact, if you see on the property, on the master plan, there's really only room for one entrance going off of US 1, and there is already a condition that a second entrance going to River Edge Drive will not be put in. On page 70 of the packet, you'll see an illustration that was provided by the applicant to illustrate that the entrance coming off of US 1 will be what's called a boulevard entrance. It will have a median between the lanes. So that was to help alleviate some of the concerns of the fire department, that if one entrance is blocked for some reason, that there would be a second entrance. Well, if one lane is blocked, there's still another lane here. This didn't satisfy the fire department 100%, but they were okay with this. They thought that this was approved prior with the original master plan, and they didn't see any issue with this. It's just something that was missed the first time around. They'd like to see this recorded as part of the record here. So they did not really have an issue with what was proposed here. There are two driveways, if you will, with a median between. So if one is blocked, you still have access to the other, through the other. On page 71 of the packet, you'll see the preliminary concurrency assessment. A formal concurrency assessment is always done during the site plan review to make sure that we have reserved capacity for water and other utilities. Page 79 is you'll see a map of an aerial that just shows the property is completely vacant with vegetation. The land use map is on page 80. And the zoning map is on page 81, and again, it's planned development zoning. With that, I'll try and answer any questions you have. The applicant is here to answer any questions as well.
All right, let's open this up to the public. I'm assuming this is Rodney's.
Yes.
Mr. Honeycutt? Would you like to come up?
Good evening, Chairman, board members. I'm Rodney Honeycutt, 3700 South Washington Avenue in Titusville. Staff was pretty detailed in their presentation. I'll follow up a little more. In the previous plan that we submitted, the landowner was the developer. And since then, the developer of the property will be Trimcore. They're the ones that developed the Solomir Grand on Knox McRae. And so they had different layout that they wanted to do. And so that's what negated the change in the master plan. And as Brad said, the major change is that there's an apartment building and a clubhouse up front. We had left that vacant before. There's the same number of units. There's not any additional number. Trimcore did want a little higher parking ratio. We don't we don't want 2.5 because we're trying to reduce as many parking spaces as we can, but their experience has been they need a little more than the 2.0. And so that's why we requested that. We met with the neighbors on July the 2nd, as required by the code. During the presentation, there was a new request, and that request concerned a ditch that runs along the eastern boundary and drains into Addison Canal. So we agreed to look at the ditch and get back with the neighbors. And so we made a site visit and determined that the ditch mostly is drainage for Falcon Marine, which is the industrial boat manufacturer on the east end of the industrial area to the north of us. And the ditch varies from probably 5 to several feet deep on the Addison Canal end. And because that's where it drains to. The ditch is draining now. There are some trees growing in the ditch. The main thing about the ditch is that's part of the buffer that we've agreed to maintain that has trees in it. It's a large part of it. And so after we looked at the ditch, we decided that there could be undergrowth, could be clean, not any trees, not any big trees, to offer something. We said anything that's a sapling that's less than 5 feet high, you could clean that. All had to be done by hand, no machine. So we agreed to do that. Then we got back with the neighbors. The neighbors that would like to see the tree buffer had rather anything not happen, but I think their understanding about the ditch, I'm sure they'll talk to you about it. Probably the individual that's interested in having the ditch cleaned might have another thought. Falcon Marine, who is really the one that it serves, doesn't really care. It doesn't serve this property at all because when the ditch was constructed many years ago, they threw the material on the west side of the bank, and so flow from this project can't get into the ditch, and we're not using that ditch as part of our outfall either. That's something that we submitted that to staff that the owner offered to when they were developing the property to hand clear the ditch as we described. Staff made the comment that I think that they didn't think that was an enforceable thing. I'm not sure why, but you guys can decide that if you want that to be part of it or not. We definitely want to leave the wooded area there. We have the same, on the other conditions, we have the same condition. On the east side, there'll be a wall, not a fence. I think it stood wall or fence last time. We clarified that because that was the agreement with those owners. That's what would be there. On the north side, it's still the same. It's an opaque fence and additional landscaping, and the northern parcel owners are satisfied with that. We also offered to give an easement to Falcon Marine if they wanted it, so they could clean that ditch since it served them, and they said they didn't want it. They weren't concerned about it, for your information. Because the ditch does flow. It's a big ditch is the reason, and it's a small drainage area. So with that, I'll be glad to try to answer any questions.
All right. Member Noel Copeland, did you have anything? I know that you took
Yeah,
that, but-
I wasn't, what's the average apartment size, number of bedrooms?
Well, Trimcore builds bigger units. Their 3-bedroom, I think, is in the 1,400 or 1,500 square foot.
I'm asking what, not square footage, what's the average number of bedrooms per apartment in this complex?
I don't know the average number. They have 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, more 3 bedrooms.
More 3 bedrooms
Yes.
than 1 or 2?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Richardson.
I realized that you were at the meeting last night, so I'll ask you the obvious question. Will this be clear-cutted?
The entire site will not be cut. There'll be buffers that will be left. This site is mostly pine trees. There are some oaks on the north side of the Space Coast Credit Union that closed.
Yeah.
And that's in the area of the clubhouse and the buffer zone, and I think those will be saved. There's not many more oaks on this site except, well, not even on the ditch side of the buffer. It's mostly palms and those. And those will remain. The area along Addison Canal, there will be no trees cleared, and there will be none in the large wetland in the center of the site, except there may be a little wetland impact on the north end, and mostly that's secondary impacts, and that won't be cleared. And so that's basically my answer.
My second question is the parking along the north side seems excessive. The amount of parking there, can you, I know you're facing, you want to meet some parking requirements, but can some of that be left naturally? Because I think you've got 3 buildings there that total 72 units in those 3 buildings, and that's an excessive amount of parking.
We spent quite a bit of time with Trimcore on the parking, and they had a layout where they showed the number of parking spaces they needed for each building, and they wanted it close to the buildings that it served, because they've had complaints when people have to walk a long ways, and so this is their desired layout for the parking.
That's all the questions I have for now.
I'd like to talk about the recommendation from the fire department, that it was not accessible or not as accessible as they wanted it to be. Who needs to talk about that? Do you need to talk about that?
Well, Brad already talked about it. I'll add a little to it. The fire department has codes, or there are codes that allow the number of units you can have without having a second entrance.
Right.
If you have more than that, you can offer other things to do to meet that requirement. And so on the original plan, we did not have a split entrance where there was a median. And so this plan, and with those apartments being up front, that first building, that boulevard goes back to where we meet the requirement in that area. And so they were satisfied with this layout.
Okay. So if I understand that there's only one entrance, that they're not using River Edge Drive.
Correct.
Wall. Is that correct?
That's correct. We've agreed with the neighbors that we would not, they don't want us to access River Edge Drive.
Okay. So.
Not even an
and
emergency
there's
access.
I don't see any way that then there could be a block from building 4 or 5 or whatever. That's
And
all.
so the other thing is DOT is not going to want us to have 2 accesses and that close together either on US 1.
Right. What's the maximum amount of people in this building? I guess you can't tell me that, can
No, I wouldn't, no.
you? Yeah,
There's 210 units.
yeah.
You could probably say 2 or 3 people a unit average.
When you do these things, do you average how many cars there are per unit?
The parking is based on Trim Corps' experience with that, yes.
Okay.
The previous plan we had less because that developer did not think they needed up to 2, and so this is 2.3. And really, it has to be in the PD, it's 2.3 because 2.5 is required by code, so it's a lesser amount.
So with your 3-bedroom apartments, that could be a sizable family. That could be a 2-car family.
That could be a 3-car family.
Yeah, I think you're right there.
That's my concern, is a 3-bedroom apartment could be 3,
Yeah, you could, because you could have an adolescent with a car too.
or you could have 3 grown people that are sharing an apartment.
Oh, my gosh.
So therefore, the parking that we have is based, Trim Corps has multiple units, places with apartments, and it's based on their experience of how much parking they need.
They have a formula, is what you're saying?
Yes,
Okay, and they're following that.
for the number of bedrooms, yes.
Is that it?
Yeah, interested in cars and trucks evidently tonight.
Maybe so, I don't know. All right, I see nobody else. Any more questions of Mr. Honeycutt? Okay. Turn on your mic. Your mic.
Sorry. The wetland that's next to the pool and the clubhouse, how large is that?
Can't you remember?
It's about 1.5 acres.
Oh, okay. So it's a small area.
It's
So
a
it would
small
be
area, but it's a pretty
open-
good area. I mean, that's, yeah, 60,000 or 70,000 square feet, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, is that it? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Can we have next card, please?
George Lewis.
Mr. Willis? Is that you?
Good afternoon, good evening, members of the council, ladies and gentlemen. I live on 5424 River Edge Drive, and that ditch was behind me where the property marker is. It's about 15 feet from my property. It's 120 feet wide by 250 feet deep. And that ditch, years ago, the county come in, if you all familiar with Titusville, the Bendix building was built there, and that other place on US 1. And they didn't have a retaining ditch, pond or whatever. And whenever it rained, Harold's Bar, or as known as now as New York, would flood. River Edge Drive, where used to be the main US 1, would flood. My father's restaurant at that address right there would flood. Water would come in. And so the county come out there, everybody would complain. Everybody who had homes and stuff on the east side and west side would flood. So the county come out there with the drag line years ago. I remember because I lived there since '58. And the second or third day, the drag line broke down after they got about a half a block to a block from the north to the south. This way, they right there broke down, and it was Les Klein and Les Markham. They were at Roden Bridge. They were head mechanics. And they finally got the parts for it and got it fixed, and they dug it all the way down to the Addison Creek. That's south. And now the ditch is holding water, but before that, after that, they used to come in there with a clam bucket and clean the ditch every 2 or 3 years. Then it was a foreman named, worked for Roden Bridge, the county, Jimmy Easley. And I'd call him, and he said, okay, I'll get down there and look at it in a couple of days. And he'd come out there and look at it, and he'd have the crew come out there with a track hoe. But it used to be the clam bucket. Then after that, they got a track hoe, and they used to clean the ditch and no water would stand in it. They cleaned it from the north end where the Bendix building is, where that fence is, going south to the Addison Creek. They'd clean it. I'd say about half a block is about 3-4 feet deep where that fence is that comes down. Then right where it goes around the curve there where that asphalt road goes to the Bendix building. Now it's something else, I can't think of it. And then it starts getting deeper. Now the ditch is 18 feet deep or more, okay? From them coming in there, I'd call them every 2 or 3 years. He'd come down there and look at it. They come in there with a track and clean it all the way down, all the way down. And it's holding water in there now. Plus it's got saplings, trees, oak trees, pepper trees. It's got palm trees like this going into the side of the ditch, right in here on both sides, all the way down. And I was just out there before I come up here. It's holding water, and you can see the lava with the mosquitoes. I got a hold of Bob Crisco, County Enforcement, here years ago. They annexed us in 2005, and I didn't know. I called the county, and they said, now you've been annexed in. That's the city's problem. I contacted the city. They said it belongs to somebody else. And that was the guy what was going to put a nursing home facility in there here 4 or 5 years ago or longer. And it fell through, and Bob Crisco did have the guy come out and clean up some from the hurricane, what flew in the ditch, roofing paper, tar paper, that galvanized roofing from people's homes and stuff would blowed in the ditch. He did clean it halfway, but the water still stood in the ditch. And then I called Bob Crisco again about 6 months, a year later, and he says the bank owns it. And I said, well, the ditch needs to be cleaned up, you know. So he got permission from the bank or through the water department, not water department, St. John's Water Management, where he could spray in the ditch, but he couldn't kill the trees or anything that was in it. Palm trees grew wild in there. And the ditch is holding water. And there's mosquitoes in it. I talked to this gentleman what was just up here, I can't think of his name, and he proposed the owner of the property would clean the ditch out, come in there with chainsaws and cut the palm trees, the little pine trees and the big oak trees, saplings and stuff was in the ditch and on the side. The ditch is like that on both sides here and both sides here. And I said, well, how about where all the twigs and pine needles and branches was in the ditch, in the middle of the ditch, right in the walkway. You go in there with boots and you step this far in mud all the way down the ditch. Now, if you get in there and clean that with chainsaws and stuff, you got to get that stuff out. They're going to get that. How about the mud and stuff with the saplings and little trees was blowed in there and rotted and stopped it up? You need, like I told him, he needs to get a clam bucket or get a track hoe. The owner ain't going to go for that. You know, I live there. I'm 15 feet from where my stake is from my property to the ditch, like from here to me to you, 15 feet. And there's mosquitoes in there. I got a dog, and I take him out every day about 5:30, 6 o'clock to go to the bathroom and everything. And he'll walk beside the ditch and do his job. And I'll look in the ditch, and you can see the lava, the mosquitoes in it. And like I said, the county does not have no paperwork when they dug that ditch, but I do. I got it right up here. I live there. I knew when they come in there, I knew Les Klein and Les Markham. They were the two head mechanics out there at Road and Bridge. And they need to get in there with a clam bucket or a track hoe and clean it like the county did. And they're opposing to go in there, the owner, through Honeycutt, to get in there with some men and chainsaws and cut the trees and the saplings and stuff out of the ditch. They got to get them out of there too. But how about where it's stopped up, all the mud and stuff where it goes like that? How are they going to get that out of there? And he said, the ditch will flow. the ditch won't flow. We haven't had no rain in 3-4 days or longer, not too much longer. And water standing from point A to point B, all in that ditch, this deep. And there's mosquitoes in it. I stopped the mosquito truck. I was coming in off US 1 onto River Edge Drive, and where the condos is on the right side. He was there warming up sprays at night. And I told him about it. He said he would tell him,
Willis.
Mr. Willis?
he said he would tell him about coming and spraying inside the ditch for the lava, for the mosquitoes.
Now, Mr. Willis.
Yes, ma'am. I'm hard of hearing. You have to speak up.
Okay, are mosquitoes your worst problem? Is that
I'm
your
sorry?
worst- Is that your biggest concern, mosquitoes?
Well, if they don't want to clean it, I don't want to give them permission to build out there.
Oh, okay, so mosquitoes are it. Okay,
If they all-
is it affecting your actual, is there water standing on?
Not just me, Jim who lives across the street.
I'm just talking to you right now, okay? So, is the water standing on your property?
No, it's in the ditch, but don't belong to me.
Okay.
It belongs to Honeycutt now. One other thing, not one other thing, it's same thing. I pay storm water taxes with the city of Titusville. Like I said, I was annexed in 2005, didn't know about it until I called the county to come clean the ditch, and another guy named Scott says, you know, that you're in the city. But anyway, I pay for storm water drain. Either the city's got to clean it or stop charging me and everybody down that street for the storm water.
Okay.
Now it
so-
goes in that ditch and goes into the Addison Creek Canal and goes out to the river.
Okay, so mosquitoes are your number one problem?
Number one problem,
Thank
plus a fire hazard with all that.
Thank you, okay, thank you.
All right. So, is that good? Are you done?
I'm sorry?
Were you done?
Yes,
I
sir.
don't want to, all right, thank you. And thank you for the history on that. So I did want to bring something up. Maybe you should get with Stan, but, all right, so I did want to bring something up because one of the things that we have to put out here is we are the planning and zoning, and I can understand if we have issues like this, and, but I do have a question about the ditch. So it's not maintained by the county, it's not maintained by the city, right? It's on the land, but apparently the water flow is coming from another piece of property. So, what responsibility? I would think that the property owner would maintain this, considering that they're gonna have a 210 unit.
I didn't understand what you said.
I would believe it would make common sense to maintain this, to ensure there isn't a mosquito problem, that there's a drain flow problem, considering that they're gonna put in 210 units. Now you have a lot more residents there that need to be considered. It would be wise for the owner, and I believe that in their best interest, they will maintain this and take care of it. But I find it a little odd that a piece of property, and I know that because it's old, old codes, old development. I know that, like you said, they just get out there and dig a ditch in
Yeah,
a
they
day
did,
or
the
so,
county.
you know? That would never happen today.
And they
But-
don't have no paperwork.
Yeah.
on it. That's what Scott said.
So I just, to let you, I believe that it will be taken care of. In my opinion, you kind of have to when you're gonna have that many residents in that area. And standing water is not good, especially here in Florida.
Okay. The owner or the city of Titusville needs to maintain it, one of the two, because I pay storm water and everybody on that street does.
But given that this isn't, and there's no easement on this apparently,
Or the St. John's Water Management with the storm water, what runs from all them,
On the ditch
places
or the
out there,
canal?
Down that creek, down that ditch and into the
which,
Addison Canal.
and that's where I'm a little bit lost at this. Because if St. John Water Management District is involved in what you can do in the ditch, and it didn't seem to me that there was an easement on this. Is there an easement on this what is the city's position with something like this? It just seems very odd that they would have to maintain the water flow from another piece of property. Although it's not unheard of, I'm sure, but,
Well, like I said, the county dug it, and then when I used to call Jim Easy, he'd come out and look at it, then it might be 2-3 weeks. They'd come out with a clam bucket or a track hoe, and they'd clean the ditch. Then, back in 2005, I was in the county, and I called Road and Bridge, and Scott come out, the supervisor, like Jim Easy, he retired, he still lives in Titusville on Old Dixie. And he says, you're in the city. I said, what do you mean I'm in the city? I'm in the county, I've been here since '58. He said, no, the city annexed you in.
right.
They didn't notify us. I come to the council meetings and everything and try to get them to put me back. They did 5 of us. And I said, put me back into the county. The county don't want you.
Well, I
Because
mean,
the fire department's way out there on 405, you know.
Yeah.
I went to council meeting after council meeting here with y'all, and they still let us in the city.
But
the
going back
city-
to the problem, though, so I would like to get staff's take on this. I mean, I understand the issue. I just don't, I question we can't really put a burden on the applicant. I believe that they're gonna have the burden themselves, but if you could answer, I had a hard time finding on the maps that I'm looking at, the aerial, it was very difficult for me to see this.
We recently had a pre-application meeting for a site plan with the applicant. And we asked them that question, that during the site plan review, in order to approve that site plan, they're gonna have to identify the owner of this ditch and the location of it. And I believe Mr. Honeycutt has found some information about it, that it was installed there to help provide water flow from an adjacent property. So it is on, if it's gonna continue to be on their property. And again, like you've already mentioned, there's probably not an easement, I'm not sure. That has to be fleshed out during the site plan process. Without it, they'll be responsible for maintaining that ditch. Because
Right.
impacting it then would cause flooding issue for an adjacent property. They can't do that.
So what I'm saying is the other property that's using this needs to step up as well, in my opinion. You know, I mean, so.
What the county did years ago, like I said, they didn't have no paperwork. I think, I could be wrong, I think it was Gene Roberts, the county commissioner, he used to have a feed store in Titusville. And he became the county commissioner, and everybody complained on that street, even my father and Harold's Bar, or then it was the Breezeway, or Harold's, whatever. And they went ahead and brought a crane in there and drag line and dug it, and then it broke down, then they got it fixed, and they dug it all the way out to the Addison Creek, and everybody's problem was solved. It used to be the old Bendix building. It comes in right by New York, and goes like this, and then the buildings, that one great big building, there's another one on US 1. All that's asphalt, all of it, all the way back to where the State Girls Home used to be. So all asphalt. And where does that water go? On everybody's property. So the county dug a ditch, and I thought they had an easement. I thought they owned it. I didn't know until now, you know, here back in 2005, when Scott said, you know, you're in the city, it's up to the city. I talked to the city. No, it's up to the landowner.
But it sounds like the city is addressing this with the applicant at this point in time. I know, well, we can bring that up later, but, so they're looking into it, so.
You're gonna look into it?
They are looking into it, they have to look into it.
Well, Jimmy lives across the street on lot 1314 on
I
the
know
east side,
Stan
I'm
might
on the west side.
disagree.
He couldn't make it tonight.
Uh-huh.
He couldn't make it tonight, but he said to make sure to tell them about everybody on River Drive pays storm water. If you pay storm water to the city of Titusville, the city, if the property owner's not gonna maintain it and clean that ditch, it's up to the city because that's storm water. Am I right or am I wrong?
Well, I mean, I don't
Thank
want to get into that at this point, and especially considering this isn't the topic, but,
I've got no problem with them building, keep that ditch clean, cut all the trees out of it, inside the ditch.
all right, I think we
And
got your
keep it
point.
clean like the county did I've got no problem. They can build it 50 feet high.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's go to the next card.
Laura Ward.
Laura Ward, River Edge Drive. So we've, residents that were interested in this along the road have been meeting with Rodney for quite a while now. And when this whole thing began, our main concerns were, main thing was that we wanted the project to be walled off from River Edge Drive with no access to River Edge Drive, so that this is a very large, intense project right up against single-family, what you would call low-density residential properties. And so we wanted to make sure that there was no foot traffic, because the river is such a big attraction, no foot traffic out of the apartment complex over to the river across our properties. The second thing that we wanted was a large natural buffer between the project and River Edge. There's a lot of mature trees all along the east side of the project, which we wanted left. And the developer agreed to all that they would leave the trees, we would have an undisturbed natural buffer there. And at the last meeting at the city council, it was agreed that it would go into a conservation easement. The fifth thing that we requested was that we not have one of those flimsy plastic white fences in between the project and our properties, that instead we would have a wall of a type that was used on the subdivision that's under construction now on our street, which is a nice composite type of material. It's very sturdy. It's a natural color. And the developer said fine with that. Sixth thing was that the wall at the south end, where Addison Canal is, would turn back and function to wall off Addison Creek from their project, so that there would not be people messing in Addison Creek from the project. And that was agreed to. Then more recently, we had a meeting and George came in and brought up the ditch. Well, the ditch runs right through the undisturbed natural buffer. So to have the ditch dredged out the way he's talking about would totally destroy all the trees and natural buffer that we've tried to have left there. So in order to try to figure out that, when we think that George was talking about, you know, keeping the ditch cleared. Well, Rodney offered to hand clear the ditch that's on his property. I know it's not Rodney's, it's his client's, but on the property, he would hand clean it once. And then after that, it would be, I guess, on somebody else. Our concern is that the natural buffer be left, and that heavy equipment and things like that not be in that buffer, knocking down the trees and clearing everything out, because that was the purpose of the buffer. I don't really know exactly. It seems to me like Rodney's offer to hand clear the ditch once is pretty good. But at some point, if it's to continue to be kept clear, now keep in mind, it hasn't been cleared for 20-plus years or more. And that's been okay up until now. So I'm not really sure. I would like to know what happened to our conservation easement.
Is that a question to me, or?
If you,
Well, I mean.
Mr. Chairman,
all
could you
right,
ask
So, yeah,
that?
because you have to direct to me. Yeah, I mean, I guess, I thought you left the conservation easement in there, on the edge. Was that removed? I thought the eastern parcel, or the eastern was put in conservation easement, which was the buffer.
It was approved by the city council.
The conditions you see before you are what was approved with the original PD that was submitted to you and to city council. So it shows a vegetation preservation buffer and a 40 feet and
45.
well, showing the plan here is 40. And the conditions that were provided to us show a 10-foot landscape buffer that will allow for the wall or wall at this time, it looks like. And then there's a 40-foot undisturbed buffer. And so the wall would be located 45 feet from the property line.
The point is that we asked for, the developer agreed to, a conservation easement to be put on our natural buffer so that we could be sure that it would be left. The trees that are in there are mature, they're overstory trees, and they are a perfect natural buffering for the lots that this thing backs right up to. And we, like, what happened to it?
Well, that's what I'm trying to find the map, because, you know, even I looked at that map, and that looks like that was the one that was removed.
Yeah, but the council approved that as a condition on this request for development order, or whatever we call it.
So, that being the case, I mean, what options do we have? And so I'm referring to the city attorney. You know, it's always when you're looking for the map, I can't ever find it, you know?
I think that we need to revisit the ordinance that clarifies what exactly Ms. Ward is referencing, and then I can comment on that. Just give me a moment.
I mean,
Well, we could take a look at the video because it was quite clear. That's why Rodney offered to hand clear it, because when there's a conservation easement, you don't use power tools in there.
Right.
You hand clear so you can retain the
So,
buffer.
I'm
right,
sorry.
I'm going back to the map, and, I mean, I do recall this, but, and so I'm looking, as you said, all of the areas in yellow are the open space, and then I looked at it, it was gonna basically be an overlay as, especially on the eastern wall as conservation. Right now, it is listed as common open space, which, and it says vegetation preservation buffer, but not conservation easement as previously discussed. So, if that being the case, and I don't know what is the proper protocol for this meeting, what can we do?
Mr. Chairman, I can answer the question. So if you look on page 62 of your packet, excuse me, this is the draft ordinance, and you'll see highlighted in yellow inside that ordinance, those are the only changes that are happening from what was originally approved with ordinance number 7-2019. So starting on page 62 of your packet, excuse me. is the title of the ordinance. And if you go further down, you start scrolling down further, you'll see this is the same language that was originally approved in 2000, early this year. And then on page 65 of your packet, you'll see some language that's highlighted in yellow. That's a change that's being added. That was to clarify what exactly is being preserved here as far as a .008 acre wetland. That is the Addison Canal. And then on page 65, further down on that same page, you'll see highlighted the 2.3 parking ratio. That's another change that's happening to this ordinance. Those are the only changes that are being proposed as far as this submittal here to you. The conditions that Ms. Ward is referring to as far as the buffer are on page 66. These are the original conditions that were submitted and approved earlier this year. And I don't see preservation easement. And I think, if I recall, there was some conversation about that. And the question from the attorney's office and from the administration was, who's going to get that easement? St. John's is not going to accept an easement for a buffer just because we asked them to do it. And the city was not going to accept an easement as well. We believe that the condition to create a landscape buffer as described here and approved per the PD zoning ordinance and illustrated on the master plan was sufficient to meet that request.
I think, you know, not that I'm speaking for Mrs. Ward, but the concern is just like any other development. Within a year, they could clear cut it down. And what the intent is gone. All the meetings, all the time, all the intent from this board, I'm sure the intent from city council. I think not that I'm speaking for Mr. Honeycutt, I think even, you know, it seems from previous meetings he was in somewhat agreement of this, and somewhere it got diluted to where it's, I mean, from all parties involved, it seems like it kind of got diluted out of it. But the intent, I can tell you this, my intent is always to make sure that the intent is in there. Conservation has been the direction the city's gone, because we've spent time in doing river edge development. We've talked about protecting the neighborhood, that specific neighborhood. This is one of the only two places in Titusville that we've spent time in protecting an area. And without some protections there, it can be cut down after a year. Am I correct? After it's been developed?
I would say I disagree in this particular case because the condition you see on page 66 of that ordinance, it says here that there will be, condition B1, there will be a 40-foot wide undisturbed buffer along the east property line. That's pretty clear. You can't disturb that.
Undisturbed to what?
Well,
and what sets that baseline?
so if they're going out there with backhoes and clearing it out, we would probably treat that as a code violation like any other piece of property vacant piece of property, you just want to go in there and start clearing trees.
I'm just saying that, you know, you have to be able to, you know, if there was a need, and this is really what happens all the time, not like I want to get on a soapbox and carry out a long conversation on this, but let's just say 5 years from now there's a need to go in and clear out the ditch, to do something, okay? And the argument is, well, you know, we had to do this, we had to do that. But the intent was to create a natural vegetation buffer. I don't know. I mean, from my standpoint, I don't know what we can do, and that's why I'm deferring to staff. In this particular, if we can make a recommendation, maybe for council to consider this.
If I may, I could try and answer that question. So after that condition was approved earlier this year, then the question came up all of a sudden was, well, there's a ditch in that area, and that's got to be cleared probably somehow, if at all, in order to maintain it. And so the concern was, from what I understand in the public meeting was, well, how is that going to be cleared and maintained? And so I guess from the at that point, how are we going to do that without violating this condition that was approved? And so I think Mr. Honeycutt was providing a means of doing that that was satisfactory to the public, that included hand clearing and other things as part of the condition of the zoning ordinance. When we got that and reviewed that by the city attorney and by code enforcement, the conclusion was that those conditions that were proposed were unenforceable. And that would just open us up to a challenge from this property owner or a future property owner in the future. And so if there's some other language that could be proposed, we could certainly look at that. But the
So-
way it's proposed tonight, we just didn't see that it was enforceable.
Let me ask you this. Does St. John's Water Management District control this ditch?
Mr. Honeycutt could answer that question, but from what I understand so far, no.
And so I'm just saying, if he was to fill this in, what would be the repercussions to the applicant from the city standpoint? If the St. John's Water Management District doesn't, if there's no control over this ditch?
So again, I think what was provided, the evidence that's given to you tonight by Mr. Honeycutt was that the ditch provides drainage from an adjacent property. So to fill it in, to not maintain it, to impede it in some way would probably cause drainage on someone else's property. That would be a code enforcement issue.
From
So
who, though?
From,
If I mean, if one property is, I know the flow of water, but my point is that if that property is not maintaining their stormwater on their property, what responsibility is it of this property owner to maintain theirs?
because it's on their property. As far as how that was put there and what the legal instrument was, that's something Mr. Honeycutt, and that's who we asked for that information during the site plan application review.
So, I mean, and all this is irrelevant on one hand, but it still goes back to, you know, even if, when it left our board, I don't know, I mean, I thought it was in there as well.
Is this considered wetland
No.
or just a ditch?
Addison Canal is considered wetland. The rest of that buffer, no.
Okay, so if it were filled in to correct the mosquito problem that our resident's having, who says that's his primary problem, then what's the repercussion?
The issue that I'm understanding from Mr. Honeycutt's testimony was that if it is filled in, it could potentially cause an issue as far as the drainage from the adjacent property. That ditch was originally put there for some other reason or other to provide drainage from an adjacent property. So if you fill it in, then you cause an issue to that adjacent
So
property.
water is going to be diverted to someplace else?
Correct.
That's what you're saying. Okay, so it isn't a wetline thing. Can the mosquito infestation be considered a health consideration?
Possibly, but I can't answer that question.
Okay.
I'm not an
This is
expert.
his only complaint.
it's
His
your-
only complaint is mosquitoes.
All right, let's get back to Laura. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Mosquitoes, you can call mosquito control. We do it all the time.
Well, you've got all this buffer right, that council has approved right on page 66, and it looks like if council has approved this particular buffer, it should, you know, it should stand, and it would be a code violation if in 5 years it was, if they destroyed it.
The question is now that they've realized that the ditch is inside that proposed undisturbed buffer within that 40 feet, they got to maintain it. And if that means going in and clearing out some of the vegetation within or outside of that ditch, that's the public's concern. That's the community's concern. And
Yes,
how
it-
is that going to be done?
It'll destroy our tree buffer if they have to bring big, heavy equipment in to clean out a ditch that's been the way it is right now for 20 years. I understand not to fill it in. I'm not really sure what George wants. I guess it's the mosquito issue, but that, we pay for county to provide mosquito control to everybody, not just to county residents. So that's a possibility that could help out with that. Maybe they need to be brought back in there. But our concern is that heavy equipment messing around in that buffer will destroy the buffer. And Rodney has offered to hand clear it, but he's not offered to hand clear it forever. And so, to my way of thinking, if it's established that the water's coming off of Falcon Marine property, then that's where you look to keep it flowing. and they can hand clear it too. And if we have a conservation easement on it, as we thought we had, then they can't come in there with heavy equipment. They would have to clear it by hand. We have another conservation easement in our neighborhood. It runs along the shoreline.
All right.
We have another conservation easement in our neighborhood. It runs along the shoreline. And that conservation easement is to St. John's Water Management. And they were in there cutting trees, and we saw them, and we called city code enforcement because the property's in the city. And later, St. John's got involved with it too. But it stopped. It got stopped. The cutting got stopped. And that's what a conservation easement is for, to me. So who accepts the conservation easement? Why not the city?
Is that a question?
Yeah.
Or to the chair?
Well, I
Oh,
mean.
I'm sorry.
I
To the
guess it'd be
chair.
a question for you, but if you could answer.
Okay. My recollection of when this was originally approved earlier this year was that how would that be different from what is being approved as far as the conditions here? And what would that easement say differently from what's here? So I think that's what the concern was. We weren't able I think we weren't able to get support from the administration of the city to support getting an easement recorded as part of this to meet that condition.
Anything else?
Did that answer my question?
No, but I know I have some pressing issues right now. Is
Okay.
it possible, can you hold your questions and we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Jordan, is your name Jordan? complete? Were you done? Were we good?
Yeah, I guess so. I just, y'all get the picture. We got a buffer, there's beautiful tall trees. They have lights, they have all that stuff coming off that project. And we have a natural cure for it, and we don't want it disturbed. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you. So, going back, Mrs. Hare, you had something you wanted to say?
I just wanted to make sure that I understand this right, because in reference to what Laurel has to say, on page 66, there's a 40-foot buffer there on the whole east side. That's twice what the perimeter buffer is. So then that's natural trees. So I think a lot of the trees are going to be saved for that buffer. And it's in the master plan. And I'm sure Mr. Honeycutt will see that it gets done. That's all I had to say.
Okay, Mr. Richardson.
My point was we should have brought Mr. Honeycutt up 30 minutes ago to resolve this issue.
All right, so one of the things that I asked while we were on break is if we could get the original map that we had seen during the previous meeting. And I wanted to look at the language in that to see what it said. If it's the same, has the map changed? And that was the question that I had of staff. So hopefully you can answer that when you get time. In the meantime, to speed things along, if we could go to the next card.
Stan Johnston.
Mr. Johnson.
Stan Johnson, 860 Poinsett Avenue, Titusville. I'm coming to you as a professional engineer and as a professional land surveyor to speak to you about this problem, which is somewhat none of my business. And but I want to say is that I would like, especially for the attorney, to listen to what I have to say, although she's talking right now to Brad, and for all y'all to, because it's some legal issues that, for example, when I'm a surveyor and there's a path going through a piece of property, by golly, I put that on the survey. If there's a ditch going through the property or a swale, I put that on the survey. There's a number of times that surveyors miss that or something like that, but it's required by the minimum technical standards. When I say minimum technical standards, that's state statutes. So what it recognizes is easements. So what I'm telling you right now is there is already an easement for this ditch for the upstream property owners, regardless of what they have to say over there. They might not be listening, because I'm telling you that the city has an obligation on something about this, Brad.
Please address the
Okay.
commission.
All right, well, I'm hoping that somebody will listen.
I'm listening.
Okay, good. All right, so I have been hired by the city and the county to review plans like this, and I've done this for years. And so the first thing I would recognize is that there is already an easement. It's a prescriptive easement. It's also called an unwritten easement for drainage. It's already there. And what that easement is for is, it says that for the upstream property owners have an easement over the downstream property owners for that flow of water to continue. Not only this, as Mr. Jordan has shared with you, is that the county has gone in there and also established an easement by cleaning the ditch. So you have an easement there that should be recognized, and I just talked to Rodney about it. I'm not saying anything that Honeycutt has done wrong, but in this particular case, what needs to be done is that for the city to recognize this easement, legally to recognize it, and that it's to take care of it. And to take care of it requires some things. First of all, you would have to show on that plan, you should show the easement on the plan somehow, and it should be recorded. The easement should be recorded. That is, right now it's unwritten, It's prescriptive, but it needs to be written now that we're establishing a site plan. And and then it's going to be, since it is, we're talking about taking care of the upstream property owners, they're not going to be the ones that maintain it. It's got to be an easement by somebody else, a government entity. That's what government is established for.
All right, so I just want to was that it? All right, I thought there was always a warning. Beep. Okay.
Okay.
So if you could,
That's it.
okay.
That's
Yeah.
it. So what I'm saying is that you need to go ahead and establish that the city, which I don't know if they're listening or not, the city needs to go ahead and establish an easement on that. And I talked to Rodney, and Rodney said, hey, city doesn't want it. Well, there's a lot of things city doesn't want to do, but the city needs to do it. And Mr. Jordan, he can't even hear right now, but because of his hearing, he didn't bring his hearing aid. But this is an important issue, not just mosquitoes, but this drainage is a legal issue that you need to take care of, the city needs to take care of. And they need to have an easement on there, and if they don't want to do it, they have to do it anyways. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next card.
No more.
All right, so we'll close this to the public. So one of the things, it seems to me like there should be an easement on this, and I think that's something that could be fleshed out later. At the same time, hopefully, were you guys able to find a previous map?
So we looked at the agenda packet that was submitted to you back on February 20th. And indeed, on the master plan itself, it does state that there will be a 25-foot wide undisturbed buffer along the east property line will be placed in conservation easement.
Right.
Now, but the ordinance itself is the same language as you see tonight. So it doesn't say the word easement in there. However, what I want to say is that I think, from what I recall in conversations during that time, was that we weren't sure how an easement, in addition to the conditions of the zoning ordinance in the master plan, would be any different.
Here's what I would suggest. I mean, that is what was voted on. That was what was approved. Even if the ditch that we're talking about requires hand cleaning, the whole intent was to leave that in undisturbed. Like I said, the code doesn't create a baseline. It never will. So the language of conservation does. I'm just bringing up the fact that that was my understanding, and I recollected correctly. So, Mr. Richardson.
Well, if I understand it correctly, council passed it with language of a conservation easement.
On the master plan, yes, sir.
On the master plan. That language cannot be changed by the administration without going to council again. And I don't think it ever came up before council again.
No, sir, I don't think so. I think what the council saw, though, and approved was the ordinance. We could ask for clarification to see what they understood with your recommendation on this item, so that they can make a decision.
So I would suggest whoever makes the motion, please address that with the motion. It's not like I want to, each part of this is important for different reasons. Whether it be for was it north property, for water, for the watershed, mosquitoes in the entire area, and for the conservation tree line that was previously discussed multiple times. I do think that, I appreciate the applicant working with the neighbors, and I listened to point by point, which is a rarity that they come up and say, we're happy. They've given us exactly what we asked for, and I think that the conservation isn't a stretch, only because of the way, what I've seen happen in the city, to where conditions change and then intent is lost. So hopefully that is addressed in the motion. And so I would entertain, well, hold on, just to be on the safe side, I would ask Rodney if he'd like to come up and rebut, or there was no, if you'd like to come up and say anything else, then I guess we can formally close it to the public.
Rodney Honeycutt again. I think if you have any questions for clarification, I'd be glad to do that. I mean, there were so many things talked about. We agreed to put it in a conservation easement. I think probably the reason it changed is when you have an easement, there's a grantor and a grantee, and we can't find anyone to take it. And it's like I even went to Falcon Marine thinking that maybe they would. And the reason we offered the hand clear is in conservation easements that the Water Management District has, you can't remove large trees or anything, but you can remove the underbrush. So we tried to kind of do the same thing and offer, and that was kind of a compromise of how to do that. And so we're still certainly willing to offer a conservation easement with similar language, you know, and that would maybe make staff feel more comfortable if it was an easement. I know there's been some comments about you could just cut it down, but you could do that anywhere, anytime, for any place. And you know, that's what code enforcement is for, is to stop things like that. But the way it is on the plan now, legally, no one could go in there and cut anything without coming back before this hearing process. A conservation easement makes it even better. You just need someone to agree to accept the easement. And I really think why no one wants to accept that is because of the liability that goes with it.
Well,
particularly the city.
Originally, and here's one of the issues I have. Originally, that was what was proposed to us, and the applicant was saying, at that time, said, we're willing to take it. Then I'm not accusing the applicant of anything, but and I definitely can understand not wanting to deal with the issue of somebody else's water. I completely understand that. But at the same time, there are other factors in this of consideration. So let me ask you this. Is the ditch on that entire property line in the entire conservation area that we are discussing?
The ditch within this property is totally within the 40 to 50 foot area.
You're saying it goes to Addison, so I'm thinking.
Yes, you can, if you have your map, the ditch comes on the property where it makes that turn and then runs within that yellow area.
Yeah.
Is the buffer area, and you
Right.
can see that blue line is the ditch that goes down.
So, you know, one of the things that I would like to say to staff is to bring the property owner, because I don't know if it's Mercury Marine. I remember
It's Falcon Marine.
Falcon Marine.
And they were at our neighborhood meeting.
So I think that, you know, they should be brought to the table. I think that we need to discover what easement, if any, is there.
There is no recorded easements.
But is there a tacit as easement, you know, where, well, anyway.
There could be a riparian right or a prescriptive easement, but that's illegal. That'd have to go through the legal system.
So-
And the presser of that would have to be Falcon Marine, who benefits from it, and they're satisfied with the way it is.
And I think
is the issue.
that needs to come up, you know? I mean, I don't know what can be forced on them, but my personal take is that you shouldn't benefit on somebody else's dime like that, of this type of nature. But that's just an opinion, so. But anyway, I do appreciate everything that you have done on this, and I think you've gone a long way, but my personal take is conservation is, as you said, a better way of handling it to give a guarantee to the neighbors of the west, or east.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. All right,
We
so-
are, also, the property owner is, the neighbor is interested only in mosquito control, and I think that could be handled through other agencies in the county.
Well, if you look at this site
And if you've
plan,
got 200 and some units, I think
yeah,
somebody
you look
else
at this
is gonna
site plan,
complain about.
this is a wetland,
Right,
and this is a wetland,
right.
and this is a lake with shallow pond. So if there are mosquitoes out here from this or that, they're gonna take care of it.
That's what I think. But I think we
In one
need
way or
to
the other.
assure your neighbor of that too.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so we will close this to the public and bring it back before the board. Would somebody, I mean, I don't know who I would make a motion, but I can't, who do I pass the gavel to? So, so if somebody could make a motion on this but I would request, part of the motion to contain the language, to revert back to the original language that this board and council voted on regarding conservation easement.
Before anyone makes that motion, just to so you understand what that means. What I read from your packet in February shows a 25-foot wide preservation easement on the master plan that is from the property line. That existing ditch is not located within that easement as proposed in this master plan. It is outside. So my question to you is, what is the purpose of this easement? Is it to preserve a buffer that is a portion of the 40-foot wide buffer that's already being agreed to by the applicant? Or is it to provide maintenance of a ditch, even though what is proposed previously is an easement that does not include the ditch?
I don't believe, I mean, in my opinion, I don't believe it's over maintenance, but I believe it
Okay.
is in, because the ditch was not discussed.
Okay.
But the foliage was for the natural vegetation, the trees, the scrub. That's my opinion. That's what I recall, but I'm one board member, so.
I agree.
All right, so, do we have a motion on this? I mean, like I said, who could I pass this to? Who's, if I have to?
Go, Joe. I'll take the gavel.
All right, so I would like to make a motion that we approve, well, is it? Yeah, okay, yeah, this is odd how it's done, but the Riverwalks Apartments Plan Development rezoning number 1-2019 with recommendation to approve, but with the recommendation that the original language approved by this board and council regarding conservation easements being included back into the plan and the map.
Is there a second?
Yes.
Okay. Second to the motion. Any further discussion? Roll call vote?
Thank you.
Member Spidel?
Yes.
Member Hare?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Member Richardson?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes.
I pass the gavel back.
All right. This motion passes, and when does this go back before council?
Their next meeting is July 23rd, the first reading of the ordinance, and a final reading, a public hearing, will be August 13th.
All right, so I'm sure that all of you know this, but please go, please state your opinion. So, thank you guys very much. All right, we go to the last item.
The last item is item number 9D, Community Engagement Ordinance, and that is on page 85 of your packet.
red lines that we got, are they consistent with what we saw?
Yes, they should be, yeah. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, when we submit a red line version to our agenda program, it does not carry over the red line versions. It just changes everything to regular text. So you don't see the changes. So what I left on the dais there was a red line version of the ordinance that is in your packet. On page 85 of your packet, I'm just going to read briefly the cover page here. Future Land Use Policy 1.23.5 of the city's comprehensive plan requires applications of land use and zoning application submittals to schedule and conduct a public or a community meeting with interested members of the public at least 7 days prior to a first public meeting. Based upon similar public engagement requirements in other jurisdictions, staff has developed standards for these notice requirements and evidence to be provided to staff about the meeting. And that is included in the draft ordinance in the packet, which begins on page 87 of your packet. And again, I gave you a hard copy that it's a red line strike-through version of the code. So on page of the handout, I'll point to that. There's a new section that's being proposed, it's 34-13 of the code, called Community Engagement. And the purpose is to provide guidelines on how an applicant for a zoning or a land use change will conduct a public meeting and provide evidence of that to us. The purpose of this, of course, is to get input from the public and to provide transparency about projects that are being presented. On page 2 of the handout I gave you, applicability, subparagraph B, every application for development that requires a land use change, rezoning, master plan, or development agreement shall include evidence of a community engagement meeting at least 14 days prior to the first public hearing. So we're clarifying what that comprehensive plan policy is saying. It says 7 days before a first meeting. We're clarifying it's actually, we're going to say 14 days prior to the first public hearing. So that'll be 14 days before your public hearing. When in compliance with all other city ordinances and regulations, the following projects are exempt from the other provisions of this section. The construction of 10 or less residential dwelling units, regardless of density. Amendments to an approved master plan or development agreement provided that less than 10% of the total acreage of the master plan or development agreement is subject to the amendment, or an increase of less than 10% of the number of residential units or square footage of non-residential development. So it's providing some exceptions here for small scale type changes. Evidence of a community engagement would include a copy of a written notice, minutes, a report, summary, anything of that sort. On page 3 of the handout I gave you, section 2 of the ordinance will propose a new amendments to the section 34-22 of the code, required information exhibits. So evidence of community engagement meeting as outlined in section 34-13, community engagement is required prior to the item being advertised for the first public hearing. And we copied this for comprehensive plan amendments, rezoning changes, master plan, and master plan changes. We did not include this for conditional use permits. With that, I'll try and answer any questions you have about this application, this ordinance.
All right, so open this to the public. Do we have cards on this?
No, sir.
All right, so we'll close it to the public. I had one question on page, this is the, page 88, which is, page 88 on 2B, all right? So it's saying amendments to an approved master plan or development agreement provided that less than 10% of the total acreage of the master plan or the development agreement is subject to the amendment, or an increase of less than 10% development or 10% of the number of residential units or square footage of non-residential development. And the reason why I'm asking is if you could clarify this a little bit better, because I'm looking at this as an exemption. And so is this saying that anything less than 10% or less when it comes to a master plan or development agreement, then it's exempt? And then anything that is over 10, where I guess you hit 11%, and then you have to,
Go through this process, yes, sir. And then so this is already, projects have already gone through the process. And then they come back and want to amend it. That's what this is doing.
other than that, I mean, I do like the fact that you're adding this as a requirement. I can understand developments less than 10. Anything above that, even quite honestly, it wouldn't, if you were to say more would be fine. 10 is a rather low number, but I mean, I do like the fact that the city's forcing community engagement, because so many times what we see is that they come up here, they haven't really talked to the residents, and then we have to try to force them to mediate a little bit, or at least discuss with the residents and try to mediate, because we can't make a decision. So this is nice that the city's going to force mediation in advance. So, are there any questions of staff on this item? Okay, is there a motion on this item?
I move that we accept these changes to Ordinance XX 2019 Community Engagement.
Is there a second?
I second.
All right, can we take a vote on this?
Member Noel Copeland.
Yes.
Member Spidel.
Yes.
Member Richardson.
Yes.
Member Hare.
Yes.
Chairman Williams.
Yes. All right, motion passes. And then last, we have summary of actions. Or is that just under reports?
Yeah, we didn't, as per your request, we included the summary of actions from June 11th from City Council. We did not have an opportunity to include the earlier July meeting that City Council had in time for your agenda submittal. We wanted to get this out to you as early as possible, but we'll include that in the next meeting.
Okay. All right, so we will go from, or two petitions from request. from
Chairman
public.
Williams. Mr. Johnson wants to speak on this 10A. Oh, you
Okay.
passed. Okay.
All right, so we'll go to petitions and requests from public present. Would you like to speak on that?
Stan Johnson, 860 Poinsettia Avenue. I'm especially looking forward to the legal staff and Brad to listen to what I have to share with you. I'm experiencing a lot of frustration, and disappointment, and anger about the issue that I'm presenting to you tonight. And I have three requests regarding it. As you may be aware, I wrote this out just tonight. You may be aware, our city manager and city council members refused to discuss with me and return my phone calls and do not respond to my emails on several issues. So I'm coming to you with one of those issues tonight. As a professional engineer, I bring to you that the city is not properly recognizing the problem is not recognized by our city council. It is important that I bring this problem to P&Z. The problem is failure. It's just the same thing that's happening with this project we're talking about, is the city is not maintaining some drainage relief that's required the city is required to have done. I didn't say the city has to do it, but the city has to have it done. The problem is failure for the city to have maintained drainage relief to the west of I-95 that is outside of city limits as required by the Stormwater Management Plan, firm maps, and other. And here's the following findings that I have. I have 4 findings that I want to share with you. One is this results in the invalidation of over 6 square miles of city of property. 6 square miles. Number 2, the fact that the city is not prepared for large storm events. These ditches, these canals are blocked up. Number 3, the fact that a large storm event can result in catastrophic damages due to the failure of this drainage relief. That's number 3. Number 4, last one, the fact that this policy conflicts with the stormwater management plan, the drainage design of I-95, the proper functioning of flood relief as required by our firm map. So regarding this problem, Brad has provided to you a copy of information. I'd like to, 3 more minutes, I think.
All right, is there a motion to extend?
Motion to extend.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay.
Thank you, okay. Brad has sent you a copy of information that I wanted provided to you, and it includes an affidavit that's recorded in public records, and it includes a sealed engineering report regarding this matter. So I have three requests of you. Number one is I request that you consider this problem and not approve the comp plan due to this problem that I've addressed you. Number two is I request that you consider this problem in all of your decisions as members of the P&Z Commission, because I'm talking about 6 square miles. And number three, that I request that you take this seriously and that you or city obtain a competent professional engineer to dispute my findings. There's 4 findings that I just gave to you of facts that I have presented to you because they're important. They're, what I'm talking about is possible catastrophic damage if we have a big storm event. I'm here for questions.
Okay, Member Copeland. No, Copeland.
No questions.
So I have a
No, we
question
do.
for staff.
Oh.
I understand the frustration and that he feels like he's tried to talk to the city attorney and the council and whoever else, and so that's why he's here. Who's the correct channel for him to get resolution or answers? I mean, we all know that sometimes somebody brings up an issue and they may be frustrated because the answer they get they don't like, but is someone addressing his concerns even if it's not to his liking, or is the reason that he's in this chamber with this commission that's not, I don't think, really related to this, because he feels like he has nowhere else to go? What's the appropriate relief channel for this discussion?
Mr. Johnson has had many conversations with the city staff on this issue. My understanding from the Public Works Department is that the issue as far as and correct me if I'm wrong if I'm getting this wrong, but the drainage ditches that he's referring to are located west of 95?
Yes.
Okay, and those are disputed as far as who is responsible for that. And I believe, my understanding from what I've heard is that the county should be asked about it, or even FDOT, but it's not the city of Titusville's responsibility for maintaining that. Now, however.
I concur.
So can the city's public works people coordinate a meeting with FDOT and the county and address the concerns?
I believe they possibly could. I would have to ask them if they've already done that, if they've
Okay.
already had conversation with them, which I think they probably already have, to be honest, because this has been going, the question that Mr. Johnson's brought up for
I
several
know,
years.
and that's why I'm just wondering, like, if the city did facilitate that conversation and got back to him and said, we've talked to FDOT, we've talked to the county, I mean, this is the answer.
I would
Now,
have-
if it's asked and answered and he still keeps bringing it up, that's a different issue.
I would direct Mr. Johnston to speak with the Public Works Director about finding alternate avenues of who to communicate with on this issue.
Okay, so have you done that? Have you,
I want to disagree with what both of them are saying.
okay, wait, answer the question first, please. Have you had a conversation with the Public Works Director?
I have.
Okay, and what happened in that
Okay.
conversation?
In this particular case, is that the person who was in charge of this was Sean Stauffer.
I don't-
Yes, that has
Okay.
very much to do with it. In other words, and Sean Stauffer, I'm filing a complaint to the Board of Engineers regarding this very issue to Sean, and I will copy it to you when I get it ready.
Is he the Director of Public Works?
He was the Director of Stormwater.
Okay, but have you spoken about this specific issue to the current Director of Public Works of the city?
The reason I don't talk to him very much at all on this particular issue, because I don't want him to get fired.
Okay, but what I'm trying to do is,
In other words, I have talked to him, and he has explained to me that he does not have any easements outside of the city limits, and he can't do that. However, I have sent to you, and Brad sent it to you also, is in your stormwater management plan, it says that the city has to have these ditches cleaned.
okay, all I'm trying to do is figure out what your right avenue is, because I don't think there's anything we can do.
Yes.
As the Planning and Zoning Commission, I don't know that we can solve the problem for you.
Well, you've
or
done
get
some
you an
very good,
answer.
you did an excellent job just right now by asking that question, because I want to disagree. In other words, I just sent you material, sheets of paper from the stormwater management plan says the city is to have those maintained.
Okay, then that is, to me.
And that's, that, in other
then
words,
that's
so,
an
in other,
issue.
I'm disagreeing with Brad right now.
About
In other
what?
words, it says it right there in the, it's right in there. It says it must be maintained.
Okay, so then if.
And
that's-
it shows improvements to be done. The city is not even, all of that is, the city is not even showing is not even budgeting in. In other words, for example,
But
I
this-
go to
but
Sean
hang on.
Stauffer, I said, you need to budget for these improvements, and he doesn't even do it.
Okay, but this sounds like it, again, it sounds like it falls under the purview of Public Works. And so-
Actually not. It also, it falls very much under the council. Council was
Okay, but
supposed to.
this isn't council, and so that's why I'm trying to figure out, I understand you're here because you're frustrated with the council, but I'm trying to figure out how you get out of your frustration.
Okay.
Who's the right person
You're
for
doing,
you
you're
to
doing
talk
some
to?
very good questions, and I'm trying to explain to you is that council is a big problem here.
But I can't do anything about that.
Well, I think you should be aware of it, because right now is that, like I told you, you can have a catastrophic event can happen, because these are blocked and you got 6 square miles.
All I'm trying to do is figure out, I don't know that we, this board, can do anything about what your frustration with the council or your frustration with this specific issue. We only, we have a very limited,
Okay, I put, in my request, I had an item, and I said, is that I've been asking for years, for maybe, I don't know, 6 years or so, I've been asking them to go ahead and get a competent engineer to disagree with what I'm saying. In other words, these things that I just now presented to you.
so by
which
saying
are-
you would like a competent engineer, you're casting dispersions on whoever they've had do it.
No,
so
I'm
that-
talking the city to hire somebody.
Right, but that, I think you need to figure out the right channel, the right person to talk to within the city organization, outside the council, within the city's working organization. And if you go to the deputy of Public Works and he says it's not me, then you say, then
It's-
who is it?
Okay, it's council and it's city manager,
But-
and neither of them will talk to me.
Okay, now, we're trying to help you.
Yes.
But
I'm-
you're in the
I'm-
wrong place, okay?
I don't think so. I'm in the right place.
No.
Because they won't listen to me at all. And
Well,
at least she's asking some questions, and Brad's saying
she's
something.
trying to be kind and try to assuage some of your frustration. But at this point, we have no power in this particular realm.
I believe you do.
You're talking to the wrong people.
I don't believe so. I think you have a lot of power, because
what
right
is
now,
it-
you can refuse. For example, you cannot approve what I'm saying is right now, you shouldn't approve the comp plan for this
So,
reason.
hold on, let's stop
Don't
right there.
approve the comp plan.
Hang on,
No,
stop right
well,
there.
we
Wait.
got workshops to do that.
No, but
okay?
let's just be clear. I mean, we make a recommendation about whether something should be approved or not.
Okay,
We
well, I
don't
wouldn't-
approve it.
Okay, I wouldn't recommend, I recommend that you
But I
don't
just want to make
approve.
sure you understand, like, you're suggesting that we have the ability to not approve it, and that's somehow going to stop it in its tracks. And
Okay.
what I'm saying is, we make a recommendation.
Right.
One of
You're
the
correct.
reasons that we get
You're
these
correct.
minutes from council is to see what happened with our recommendations.
Okay.
Because we know that sometimes we make a recommendation and it isn't followed.
Well,
So
for
we're
this
trying to
very reason.
understand that.
For
So
this-
But again, I'm not trying to shut you down. I just want to make, you're going to continue to come back here frustrated because you can't get anywhere because you're in a spinner. You can't get out of it. So that's why I'm asking staff, what is the appropriate way for you to get relief or answers? And you might not like the answer that you get, and then you're just gonna at some point have to say, I don't like it, but I accept it, I'm gonna move on.
Okay,
But I want them to help understand, how do you get an answer to what appear to me as a non-engineer and a non-whatever? They seem like reasonable questions. I think someone should answer them. Whether that is to your satisfaction or not is another story.
I can certainly speak with Mr. Johnson after the meeting, and I can follow up with the Public Works Department to get specific direction, and we can resolve this, I'm sure. As far as the comprehensive plan,
Sure. Well, go ahead. I mean, it would be nice that
As far as the question as who to go to, we can find that.
Yeah.
And then as far as the comprehensive plan, I'd be happy to speak with anyone, including Mr. Johnson, about any proposed policies in there. So we could certainly talk with him about this.
I mean, I think you just feel like you're getting the runaround, and I
Oh, I
don't
am.
want you to feel like that. So if we can just get them to the right people, but then, Mr. Johnson, I want you to promise that if they give you an answer, even if you don't like it, that's a different story. Like, at some point, you may have to say, I don't agree, but I'm gonna move on.
Well, it's violating their codes and violating FERM.
Well, if
FEMA,
it's
and
violating
everything
the
else.
code, then you need to go to whoever the code enforcement board of that particular code
They won't do
is.
it. I've done that, and the city will not enforce their own regulations.
Well, that is something I think Brad can help us with as
So-
well.
City won't,
I know that you and I've even gone to a workshop with, gosh, I can't remember, it wasn't Sean Stoker, or it was somebody else. It was here, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Yes, this is something that's been ongoing. And yes, I know that some of the avenues for you have not been fully open. I do think one of the things that we do have control over is the comp plan, and we are beginning that. And I would suggest that on several of those areas that you put your 2 cents in.
okay.
At the same time, there are, hopefully you can reach out to somebody in city staff that can address, but I've seen this back and forth for years. I've read what you've sent. Some of it is undeniable. Some of it is, I don't know, because it is in county. I don't know if that does fall on us, but hopefully, something will start. But I agree that we are not always the proper board to handle some of this, but bear in mind, Stan knows, he knows what he's doing. This is another avenue. It's a public comment. He has the right to come up here. But I do think that the county needs to, I think the city needs to engage the county a little bit. And honestly, if
You're right. You're correct.
if you're not getting the right answer from either one of them, then maybe you should address it to the state, at a state level.
Okay.
But I know you've gone back and forth. I know the story. So,
Okay. Thank you, Sean.
all right. All right, we will go to city reports. Is there anything else you'd like to report?
Just, I left on the dais in front of you the notes from yesterday's tree protection workshop. I thought you'd like to see that. Comments were made from the city council members. And then also I left on the dais there a growth management planning officials training flyer. There are 2 commissioners that have already asked to be registered for that. That's a very good program. We had it here a couple of years ago, and several members attended that. So I'd really encourage you to take that opportunity.
Is that the one that's next week?
Yes, on July 26th.
Yeah, I would attend, but I'm going to be out of town,
Okay.
out of state.
We do this every year, so at different parts of the area. I know there are a few slots available still. That's all I had.
Okay, city attorney.
I wasn't going to mention this, but since I thought of it, with the recent training, I went to the Florida Municipal Attorneys Association conference last week. Spent some time networking with the Florida League of Cities officials who were there. And I am now on a committee that I haven't been a member of before. One of the League of Cities has a legislative committee called the Urban Administration Committee. It's kind of a catch-all. Not specific to growth management or transportation, anything specific. It's the catch-all that has different issues that come up before the legislature, and the committee will meet 4 times a year. They've already met, and I will be joining them for future meetings. Sarah Stokel is our council member who is our liaison to that particular committee, and I look forward to sharing with you everything that comes through that committee in the future.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Richardson.
I would just like to point out as a friendly reminder that your button is there to be recognized. You press it and the chairman will call on you in order. Because Member Hare and I have pressed our buttons several times and tried to make a point. And every member should press the button to be recognized.
Okay, I agree. Let me remind you, though, at that particular time, why I didn't call you is because I had somebody there that I need. Okay, I needed Laura Ward to finish, and then I would have called you because it would have been either a direct question to her or it would have been to, but, okay, I understand. Member Hare, anything from the school board or?
Excuse me, nothing from the school
I
board.
know you're not the liaison anymore, but I know that they still
But
like
they
to give you
still-
reports. so.
Yeah, they still feed me information.
Okay, Member Spidell.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Member Noel Copeland.
No report.
And I only have one question, and it's more of a, and it's not a complaint, but I do have a question about, well, like when you're pulling out, like let's say on 50, and you have flags on, like in the grass area, and is that, what is the rules concerning putting flags or anything in the,
You're talking about 50 and 1?
no, 50 and, I don't want to call
You mean
anybody
like
out.
a business has
A
big
business
open
has put
flag?
signs and then it blocks the roadway, but they're
Whatever
putting it in
happened
the
to the
easement.
signage ordinance? Didn't that get killed at
And-
some point?
Right away.
So yeah, in the right of way. And I only say that because if I'm having a problem seeing, and I know for some I'm rather old and for some I'm rather young, but if I'm having a hard time seeing, I could only imagine what other, and so I'm just curious if the city ever, is there regulations on this about?
Signs in the right-of-way are prohibited, and it is a code enforcement issue, and they
But
can,
they're like practically permanent signs, so.
Is it in the median?
No, it's in the, well, I think,
It's on the right of way.
You're talking about in the median or
Next
like
to-
on the corner of their lot?
yeah, I mean, next to
What do they sell?
next to the sidewalk that leans over into the sidewalk. And
Mr. Chairman, after the meeting, I could show you, you could show me on a map exactly which area you're
All right,
talking about,
yeah.
and I could
It's not
find
like I'm
out.
wanting to make some code enforcement thing, or
Yeah.
I'm not trying to do that,
No,
but
it's a
I'm just
safety issue.
curious of the code for that, because I see certain businesses do that in other areas. This particular area, it's almost a permanent sign, and if there's accidents because of this, who's responsible? So, but that's all. And then, Member Richardson, you had something else?
Yes, that kind of brings up a point. These crepe myrtles in front of Publix on 50 are endangering the line of sight when you turn a certain way. And they existed in a community where I spent a lot of time. And it didn't allow people to see what was coming, and someone was killed because of the crepe myrtles. So they took them all the way down, and they get so big, you can't see what's coming. And I'm just pointing that out, that someone needs to address that in the medians.
We'll speak with code enforcement about that.
It's being chopped up. It's
Okay, is that it?
That's it.
All right, so we're adjourned.